So Chris Fafalios, good to see you, man.
You too, Ron. How you been?
I've been good. It's been I was thinking about this shortly before we signed on. I think it has been approximately 20 years since
20.
my last punchline show.
Where would that have been?
It was Club Laga.
Club Lock. Very
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Very
Club
nice.
Laga was that's how far back it goes. And I'm pretty sure I was a senior in high school. So
Awesome.
it's crazy. But so the first thing I want to talk to you about, I've thought about this. You have been entertaining me for like for like literally more than half my life.
That's
But
awesome. Thanks.
oh yeah, well thank you. But in different variation, like different capacities as we've both grown up. Like it started like I just liked your band and still like your band, but then it's like you got into this podcasting space and I like the podcast you're a part of. So it's sort of like as I grew up and got into different things, there was always something Chris Fafalios centric that I enjoyed.
I just
And
got to be out there, man. I gotta, I gotta make my voice heard out there for better or worse. My voice is out there in the world, one way or another. I never. You said I've been entertaining you. I just questioned myself. I don't think I've ever thought of myself as an entertainer, but I guess
well,
maybe I could be considered an entertainer. I never thought about that. When I think of an entertainer, for some reason, the first person that comes to mind, I don't know why, is Janet Jackson. I think of Janet Jackson. She's a true entertainer, and I don't know if I could put myself in the same ballpark as Janet Jackson. But when you said that, it made me think that. So thanks,
that's
Ron.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, hey, I don't know. Maybe it was just a weird choice of word,
No, I like it.
I felt like creating content that I found valuable would have been way
Well,
longer. Uh,
nice. Well, I appreciate that.
well, so talk a little bit about your creative evolution. Then, I mean, obviously you're still doing music. It's not like you left that, but you've done all these other things. Like you make pins. Like, talk a little bit about just the whole like creative quilt of Chris Fafalios.
I think everything that I have done for the past few decades creatively has stemmed one way or another from the fact that I play in the band Punchline. I think that everything is just along the way. I mean, look, podcasting, for example, I found out what a podcast was in like 2005 or 6 or something. And I'm like, oh, I want to do that. And so we started making Punchline podcasts like in the van. Obviously, the audio quality was less than perfect and whatever. But from there, I'm like, oh, I like doing this. So that was because of Punchline. I started doing that. Video editing, anything like that. It was because I wanted to make video stuff for Punchline. Anything that I've done was the spark came from my band. So I think that just led to all these other projects. And then, along the way, if I got half good at something, then maybe I would do that thing for somebody else. Somebody else would hire me to do it, or I would voluntarily do it for someone I liked or something. So I think that it's like with anything, man. If you start doing something and you stick to it, all these other doors are going to open. And I think that's how I got here, decades later, and do a bunch of different things and try to, balance a lot of different things at the same time.
That's really awesome, actually, because yeah, and I feel like that's sort of a universal story. Because as you were saying that, I kind of thought of like, oh, everything I've done in the past like decade and a half has all stemmed because one day I started doing stand up.
Right.
Like everything else, like it all started with me doing stand up, and it just kept morphing and morphing from there.
Right.
Um,
And
so
podcasting, dude, I listen to a lot. I hear a lot of stand-up comedians talk about it. It's like the thing you do, right? Like it's if you're a stand-up comedian and you don't have a podcast, what are you doing?
yeah,
It's with musicians too, kind of almost. It's same old story.
it's getting to that point, which I do enjoy because I like. I mean, I listen as a listener. I listen to more music podcasts than comedy podcasts.
Well, that's funny you say that because I think it's whatever you do, you want to hear about other things. I
Sure.
listen as a person who plays music. I listen to a lot of sports and comedy and anything else. because I'm talking and listening to people talk about music so much already that I want to hear about some other things, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to run this by you, and we're going to talk more about the audio documentary series that y'all made about the band, which I enjoyed a lot, by the way. But
Thanks.
while I was listening to that, I kind of thought, because I was kind of near all this stuff from like, I guess, 99 ish up until I left for
Mhm.
college, basically. And I feel like that generation was kind of the last touring generation in like the Black Flag sense, where there was, you want to go to this town and play this venue because they sort of have a built-in audience and there's a little bit of scene cred. I feel like that was still around when you guys really started hitting the road, but I don't know if it's around anymore, or maybe I'm just older. But
You know,
what's your take on that?
that's a really good question because there were a lot of little, I mean, every VFW, every fire hall, every Elks Lodge in the country, I swear we played at them. And we even, in our hometown, now I'm talking hometown. Pittsburgh, of course, is we call it our hometown, but we're from the Mon Valley, which is even a smaller place. But there was a place called the Charleroi VFW, which we would set up our own shows there. And then touring bands that went on, a lot of bands that went on to become way bigger bands, would, if it was a Tuesday night and you're on tour, you're going to play at the Charleroi VFW. If you're the All American Rejects on a Tuesday night, you're going to play at the Charleroi VFW. You know what I mean? And there were those places all over the country. And at this point, in my experience, when Punchline goes out and plays, we're going to play like at least a decent venue. We're kind of, we haven't played a little place like that in a pretty long time. Not that I wouldn't. It's just, it might be what you're saying. It might not be as prevalent. And if it is, I don't know about it as much. It seemed like Pennsylvania alone, you used to be able to go to places like, okay, around Pittsburgh, of course. You go to Erie, Edinburgh area, Altoona, Johnstown, St. Mary's. There was always kids putting on a show. By kids, I mean someone from between the age of like 15 and 20 putting on shows. Like you said, there was a built-in audience because it was the thing to do in that place, regardless of who the artists were. And I'm sure you had a wide variety of like the worst band you ever heard to some amazing band was playing there, maybe on the same bill sometimes. But yeah, I think you might be right. I don't know if it exists as much anymore. And if it doesn't, that's a shame. I hope that it still exists and I just don't know about it as much.
It's funny you mentioned that All American Reject show because I was at that show.
Nice.
I still remember they were on TRL like a week and a half
Right.
later.
Dude.
And I remember seeing that. And I was like, I saw those guys at a fire hall.
Yeah.
And like 5 people knew who they were. Like,
that was the era too, man, where we would see it. Like you said, I mean, it was fast for some bands that would catch on. We were on tours with bands that would catch on and we'd see night by night an increase in the crowd size. Like if it happened fast. And, it was because, if you got on TRL or something, yeah, of course, but it was because of the internet. It was because that was file sharing, that was LimeWire and Napster and things were spreading like wildfire. People were passing stuff around. So you saw stuff really start to explode like in real time around that time. So yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty exciting time to think about all the advances that happened in like a few short years when you look back on it.
no, it is incredible because it's like those opportunities were there, but also the internet wasn't quite what it is today as far as how much stuff is just there. So yeah, stuff would just spread like wildfire, and you would see. And then it was like that was the time when the biz started to notice what was going on in the pop punk world, which I'm sure you could speak to this infinitely better than I can. But it was just crazy to see, even as a listener, because I mean, I still remember talking to a friend about a Warped Tour they went to, and they'd be like, there was this one really funny poppy band that I really enjoyed. They were making a bunch of jokes about their dicks. And then 3 weeks later, Blink 182's all over MTV. Yeah. It's like, oh, that was the band I was talking about.
Yeah.
It's just nuts.
At that time, especially if you could harness the power of the internet, not everyone was doing it, but I think that our experiences, we were always like pretty good. I felt like in recent years, now I'm trying to catch back up on it, but we were always like on top of stuff. Like we had a website. I mean, on the podcast, we talked about it. Like we kind of had a website before most like local punk bands would have a website, and we were ahead of the game on like YouTube and things along the way. And there were a couple things in recent years that we slacked on. TikTok, for example. We're on it now and we post on there, a good bit now, but we weren't on the cutting edge of that. We should have been, and I want to make sure that I'm always aware of what the next advancement in technology that people like to use is. And I felt like back then we were always, a little bit ahead of the curve. And that helped us be able to do what we did.
I think that's fair to say, man. I mean, honestly, like, and I'm not like trying to flatter you or whatever, but I think you guys really set a great example of just how to be as a band if you want to really do it. I mean, you guys, even just being a fan of yours, you guys were always doing different fun, creative things in addition to putting out music that I enjoyed. I mean, I remember you made like a kind of Jackass style documentary. And and that was like no bands or not many bands were doing that, but you guys had one and it was really funny. Like I remember
got us signed. That thing
did it?
It was a big factor in us getting signed was like them watching the Rewind documentary that that we made ourselves and our friends made. And now that would be every band that's trying to do something just posting YouTubes all the time, but it was pre-YouTube, so it was like one big 45-minute YouTube of us. I mean, just trying to be funny.
I thought it was great. I mean, that whole thing where you claimed you wrote your school's theme song, and then I don't think it was someone. I think it was a friend of the band. I think it was Johnny Yetskanish, but he interviewed the one teacher and was asking about students that he didn't even teach. Like the teacher was getting annoyed with them.
Mr. Pesos, of course.
Dude, that was so funny.
Nice. Glad you liked it, man.
I still remember that, and I watched it. I was in high school when I watched that thing, and I still remember bits and pieces of it.
Hell yeah, love that.
So let's talk a little bit more about how you really got into the podcasting world. I mean, you mentioned like the band would just kind of do stuff in the van, but how did you then go on to, start to launch some of the things you launched?
So, at first my crash course in podcasting was what's a podcast? And then made, not even knowing what we were doing, made, I don't know, 20 some, maybe 30 episodes. I can't even find them anymore. They were called the Chris Fafalios White Van Podcast. And it was just when we were driving, we would just make a podcast. And what funny little note about that is that it ended because we were driving in the middle of the night and we were podcasting, and this has nothing to do with what happened. It's just like we were just having a conversation in the van, and we were driving, and boom, while we're driving in the middle of the podcast, an owl flew into our van, into the grill of the van, and we're like, what was that? And we pulled over, and there's an owl just dead stuck into the. I mean, it would have happened whether we were podcasting or not, but I feel like we just went, we're good on podcasting now. It wasn't because we weren't paying attention. The thing ran right. It would have happened regardless. But that was, I guess that was like 2006, 2007 or so. And then a few years passed. Steve from my band, his brother Mike Sabosley, and I started a podcast called Men in Their 30s Only that we did for years. And it was just us talking about how we're in our prime. We're in our 30s. It was called Men in Their 30s Only, but the subtitle of it was a podcast for everyone. And we got the title from, I don't know why. There used to be like these Facebook groups called like Teens Only or whatever. And we used to laugh about that. So we made a podcast called Men in Their 30s Only. We did that for years. And want to know something funny about that podcast is we did it to make ourselves laugh. We'd post about it. And I didn't realize it because I had nothing to compare it to. Every episode that we put up of that was getting thousands of downloads. And I guess I didn't realize what we had. Like I said, I was like, oh, I guess that's just an average amount. But then I've seen and talked to other people who's like, dude, that's a lot of plays. And I was like, I didn't realize. Now I realize it, and so anyway, we did that for 80 or 90 episodes over the course of a few years. And, eventually my good buddy, Matt Kelly, hit me up about doing a podcast about one-hit wonders. And I was like, yeah, sure. Not thinking anything of it. Now here we are 200 episodes, close to 5 years later, 4 or 5 years later. And that's been a major thing for me that we do well with that. But then in the early months of that, Chris DeMakes from the band Less Than Jake, who we got to know, from years, they took us on tour several times and, been friends of ours, hit me up because I had taught myself how to do animation and, just basic animation, but pretty decent. And he wanted to hire me to do something to advertise his songwriting. Like he would do like jingles or personalized songs. You see a lot of people do that, songwriters. And then once I finished the project, he was like picking my brain about like, what would you do to try to get the word out about, the fact that I write songs and stuff? And I said, why don't you start a podcast? And he's like, nah, like most people do. I'm sure you've heard. He's like, nah, everybody has a podcast. Why would I do that? And I said to him, well, yeah, maybe, but you could say that about being in a band. You could say, oh, everybody has a band. Everybody does this. It's what you do with it. And I said, everybody's not you. And so he called me the next day and was like, hey, I want to do a podcast. Will you help me do it? And then that was the start of that. And obviously, we've been doing that podcast for like 4 years now. And between his connections and me just cold reaching out to people and whatever, and word of mouth, that Chris DeMakes a podcast has really blown up and been I don't know, it's really opened a lot of doors too. Everything you do and you stick to opens 50 other doors for you, it seems like. And that's the way that is. The main thing with podcasting I found is you got to stick to it. I think I saw a stat that like I forget, it was at least 90% of podcasts last 7 episodes max, and then someone's just like over it, So I think that like the stick-to-itiveness of it, and if any success I've had in podcasting, I attribute a big portion of that to just sticking to it and being like, I'm releasing an episode every week. And, luckily I've surrounded myself with people who also have that dedication. That's hard sometimes too, is to find people that are dedicated with it. But yeah, I don't even remember what the original question was. Sorry for rambling for so long.
I mean, it was podcasting. So yeah, you nailed it.
Right.